Welcome to this session of the Cyber Leaders Exchange. My guest today is Kelvin Brewer, the Director of Public Sector Sales Engineering at Ping Identity. Kelvin, thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Yes, thanks for having me on, Jason. Appreciate it.
As part of our Cyber Leaders Exchange, we've been hearing from a lot of different federal executives and folks in the industry about the challenges around cybersecurity. Today, we are going to talk about identity management. That's what Ping Identity does, right? It's right there in your name. So let's start at the beginning. Agencies are moving towards zero trust. That's been on that journey for several years now. Identity and access management has been kind of one of the quote unquote low hanging fruits of zero trust. Yet still, I think there's still a lot of challenges ahead. So start with, what are you starting to see from agencies around their move to zero trust? Where does ICAM fit? What's the state of play?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we see that we've experienced with our customers. One of them, of course, is there's still a lot of legacy technology in the identity space that's out there. And so there's a big technology debt, big technical debt, legacy infrastructure. And one of the challenges we're seeing is that a lot of identity solutions have started stepping away from supporting a lot of that legacy infrastructure. And if you don't keep everything secure, then you can have a great zero trust framework in the newer technologies and cloud solutions and things like that. But all of that legacy stuff gets left behind and becomes a target for infiltration for bad actors. So, if we're truly going to be zero trust, one of the things that needs to happen is we need to keep supporting the legacy technologies that are probably still going to take a while to get replaced, or maybe some of the things will never get replaced. One of the other things I wanted to make a point on that is that there's also just the different needs of the different types of missions that we're doing in the federal government require different types of technologies, and there's no way to standardize on one thing like just SaaS. There's no way to standardize on that and truly have a zero trust framework for an agency, because a lot of agencies have many different departments that need multiple different types of identity solutions, and that's one of the things that we see as a big challenge. One of those that we've seen is the different facets of the Department of Commerce. Some of them still need on-prem identity management. Some of them still need to be able to run in a hybrid mode. Some of them are fine with SaaS. It just depends on their mission. And we've had some experiences with them where we've got some groups that we work with that said, we're going to be, as far as we know, we're going to be on-prem software forever. And that's one of the challenges with really getting to a place where you're comfortable with your zero trust framework, is having the ability to say, we have a flexible identity solution to be able to meet all of our needs.
You mentioned the tech debt, and we've been talking about tech debt for years. I remember back in the Obama administration, Tony Scott put a number on it. It was like $7 billion, 2015, 2016 timeframe. I'm sure we're much higher. Are we talking about legacy identity or just legacy generally? Because there's challenges to both.
Yeah, and I would say both, because in a lot of cases, there's not enough funding to say, let's go replace the existing identity solution fully. But what they need to do is get a solution in there that's going to augment what they have already got, because there's serious tech debt that's been put into an existing identity management solution that's meeting the 70-80% of the use cases today, but there's just that high exposure of those other use cases that it can't do because it's a legacy system. And so where we're seeing it in the identity space is that, in some cases you want to replace that old system, and other cases we just need to augment it. We need to add some functionality to it with a solution like Ping Identity, just to make up that difference in the technical debt there. And then there's always systems there's always that old mainframe that's still sitting around that you can't replace. There's always some of those old, specifically we're seeing it in the manufacturing sector in government, is that there's a lot of these old systems that there is no solution to go to, and they have to have something to protect those. And they need, in a lot of cases, need to run in a disconnected or DDoS environment, because they can't be on the web because they're so exposed.
I think you bring up the identity management piece. I mean, a lot of agencies invested in identity and access management back in mid 2000s, right? When HSPD 12 came out, and we were all very excited about the future of the smart card. And now they're like, okay, we have this legacy system where you have to have that smart card, you have to have the smart card reader. Oh, but everything's in the cloud. And is that kind of what you're still seeing? People wedded to that old school HSPD 12 smart card reader approach versus, to your point, the SaaS approach, which I'm going to verify my identity in a cloud atmosphere, so to speak. I can do it through multiple factor authentication, not just the card and my PIN.
So, I don't see the PIV card going away or the CAC card going away anytime soon. And that I don't consider that necessarily a technical debt because in a lot of ways, the federal government's ahead of where commercials at in the respect that everybody has a way with, certificate auth through their PIV card. They have a way of authenticating, and then we can challenge them with other factors and we can do additional verification that increases the security, which is what we need to be doing today. And that's irrespective of being in cloud or on-prem. I think that smart card is a solid way of doing it, but there's also now more and more scenarios where people can't authenticate with their smart card, and that's where you get this challenge of derived credentials. And one of the things that we've seen with derived credentials, and we actually talk about it all the time. I'm involved in an identity management working group with industry and government. And we talk about this all the time where it's like derived credentials really haven't taken the foothold that they need to because of a lot of different technical challenges. But that is something that's a huge need in the federal government, is to embrace this derived credential concept to make up that difference in technologies where the smart card can't meet the user where they're at. And so we need to have something else to authenticate them.
You mentioned direct credentials. I was about to ask you, can you define that? Then you used my favorite word, derived credentials. So are we talking about the similar things here? Can maybe give us a briefer definition?
Sorry that I said direct. I meant derived credentials, but that concept of a derived credential is, maybe it's a FIDO token. It could be something over WebAuthn where they're using the fingerprint or the facial ID, fingerprint on their laptop or the facial ID on their phone. But it's something that is tied to their certificate that is used by the PIV to say that when the PIV card is revoked, so is the derived credential. There's a link there so that they have one life cycle for their management, and it's not handled as a separate credential that has its own life cycle. An example has always been a challenge until recently with FIDO tokens. The FIDO tokens didn't have a way to tie them to a user. A user could technically go out and buy a FIDO token from a company and then use it to authenticate into any of their personal accounts. And there was no way to protect that in the government space either, because it's just a FIDO certificate and there's no tie to an individual. So that's where now they have the ability to do attestation and to tie an identity to a FIDO token, which has made a big difference in being able to use FIDO for derived credentials, as has been encouraged in multiple executive orders.
All right. I appreciate that. I think it's really interesting because, and you may have said derived and I heard direct, so we won't blame you for everything. I'll take some of that blame on the word, but I know that that was a big deal. Again, I go back many, many years about the idea of how do we get to that derived credentials. And I think that's where that flexibility comes in as agencies continue to implement identity and access management software and apply it. They need that flexibility. You mentioned the example, which was a really interesting one about, hey, we may never move off prem. And then also, hey, we may be in the cloud for a long time as well. Is that crossing that barrier, that hybrid workplace that we talk a lot about, cloud computing and applications and technology? How does the identity access management piece kind of make sure that it can kind of float between uh, on-prem, cloud, and hybrid?
That's a great question. And that's something that at Ping Identity we're really passionate about because, a lot of the identity solutions have gone to SaaS only. And that, it's not necessarily that that's a bad thing, but it leaves behind a lot of flexibility for use cases that need to be supported by the federal government. And what they're having to do is rely on some of this technical debt legacy identity solutions to manage their on-prem use cases where they can't go to cloud, where they have to have an on-prem identity management system. And then they're relying on something from, like you said, a 2005 identity management solution to still support their on-prem solutions. What we've decided to do is we have created feature parity between our FedRAMP, IL5 cloud solution, SaaS solution, and our on-prem software. So you can have one template that can be deployed anywhere. And we have use cases in the DoD where they have our software being deployed with a template of preferences that are the kind of acceptable way of configuring our software, deployed out to all these DDoS environments where they have very low bandwidth or no connectivity or occasional connectivity. In those use cases, they have the ability to do a configure once, deploy many times type of a model, where it supports a modern identity management solution that can do all their life cycle, that can do their access management, that can take their CAC PIV cards to authenticate them, and it's not online, and it's not using a SaaS solution. And that use case, we're seeing more and more as we're getting more and more agencies coming to us saying, we need this, and there's not a lot out there that can do it. And so and that's something that we've committed to continue to support, whether you're running stuff in the cloud or you're running stuff on-prem, we want to be able to support it with the same feature set.
Part of the challenge here is so many agencies, and DoD is the main one, but so many other agencies are seeing the opportunities at the edge to say, hey, well, people already have phones. The phones are probably as powerful as a laptop was 5, 7, 10 years ago. Well,
Yep.
what if we could use the phone to do a lot of this data collection, data analysis? Okay, but we still need some security around that phone or around that laptop or that tablet. How do we ensure that happens? And at the edge, is that the use cases you're talking about with a lot of it? You mentioned detail, but even at the edge, using satellite, low orbit satellite, or whatever they need to kind of connect back.
Yeah, there's situations where we're deployed out to like a backpack. And the backpack itself has a really low bandwidth Wi-Fi antenna that the phone can connect to. And they can then authenticate into the solution right on their phones and communicate with something that may be collecting intelligence data or doing something of that nature. There's use cases like that all over the place where you don't want to be connected to the web. And what you're trying to do is allow somebody on that tactical edge to be able to connect to a solution, but they need to authenticate in. And they need to then be provisioned the right access to what they are based on their role. And you can't just assume that just because they can log in, they should get access to anything. No.
I think that's the one that's the big challenge as you talk about this idea of connect to anything. Before it was like, okay, you have the card and the card will do it all. Now it's okay, but things are getting much more complicated. One of the things we got to talk about when we talk about ICAM is, of course, AI. That's the future of everything, it feels like. But I think when it comes to using identity access management, agencies need to say, okay, well, if we're going to have agentic AI in the background doing kind of that low value, monotonous work, you still need identity. And I've heard this about RPA, early days of RPA. Hey, we have to give them an identity somehow. They used
Yeah.
to name them, oh, this is our George Washington bot, or this is our Mary bot, right? Like, so, but you still need to deal with that challenge too, because that could be another potential threat area. How are you all starting to look at ICAM and agentic AI and make sure that all fits together?
Our users who are listening to this, I would really suggest that you go out and just look for some videos by my CEO, Andre Duran, the CEO of Ping Identity. He has done a bunch of discussion about agentic AI and what's coming. We have the use cases around that I would consider the non-person identity entity type use case where you've got to assign them an identity and manage them, where like what you mentioned, Jason, about the idea of having something like an AI, an RPA solution that needs an identity. We have that, and it's something that is that we're dealing with today in a lot of different environments. But now with agentic AI, what that does is it gives people who are trying to commit fraud, and it's a huge risk for the federal government, a way to try and be more attack focused on things like employment fraud. So an example would be allowing the agentic AI and the AI solutions to apply for jobs with the federal government, to show up to then have somebody else come in who wasn't hired as the actual employee to show up to get their identity proofed and everything else, and then have the AI do things like get privileged access to the environment. And foreign governments are salivating over agentic AI because of its applicability to getting access to things through employment fraud within the federal government. How do we prevent that from happening? And at Ping Identity, there's two solutions that we're really working on. Our development teams are working on making sure that we have them ready to combat agentic AI, and those are focused on verification at every step. If someone's got a new employee and they have some sort of role where they need privileged access, we want to not only just maybe reprompt them for MFA, but because of the risk of agentic AI, we need to consider re-verifying their identity through a verification process. And that needs to be tied to their selfie with liveness check against their PIV card picture and making sure that we do proper verification of who they are before they get that privileged access. And it doesn't have to take very long, because a lot of times it's just checking again a new selfie with liveness check against what's already in the records and then moving them into the system. If we're not doing things like that, agentic AI is going to get in and compromise our systems. And it could be an agentic AI set up by North Korea that now has access to federal government resources. And so that's where agentic AI is going to create a huge amount of risk for commercial entities, government entities, and it even is to the point where agentic AI is going to be able to do things like a citizen could enable agentic AI to file their taxes for them. Those kind of things. How do we recognize that it's an agentic AI doing it and not a citizen? We already have delegates submitting their taxes through a tax accountant or something. But what if an agentic AI is doing it? Do we want that? What's the risk? How do we recognize it and prevent it? And those are the things that we at Ping Identity are talking about and looking at, trying to find solutions to solve.
Kelvin, we got maybe a minute or so left, but one thing I just want to touch back on is verification at every step. People may hear that and go, oh no, well, what about the user experience? We've spent the last 5 years talking about the user experience. Am I going to have to put my credentials in or do some sort of MFA at every step? That's going to take me forever to log on, right? I could hear it already. Let's put those to rest. The user piece is still very key, because if you make it too hard, right, they'll figure a way around
Yeah,
it.
exactly. And that's important, because what we have to do is we have to make it risk-based. So it's not that we want to over verify or over prompt for MFA or any of those things. What we want to do is be constantly checking risk. And that's where these risk solutions, we have one at Ping called Ping Protect. They're so important, because what they do is they look at the signals, including outside signals, and identify if the person who is coming in, maybe they have we can check all sorts of signals, but things like keystroke speed and things like that, we can do, user event behavior analytics, things like that, that allow us to see anomalies that then say, this is an increased risk. Let's prompt this time. Let's re-verify this time. Let's look at the variables and make those decisions. And then let's make it easier for those people that have a low risk. Let's make it streamlined and make it easy on the users.
I remember years and years ago, Terry Halverson, the former Navy and DoD CIO, talked about user. Well, we'll measure how you walk or measure how you talk, and we're all like, yeah, yeah, yeah. It sounds like we're almost there. If not, we're already here.
We're there.
And Kelvin, this is I'm glad you were able to put any concerns people had to rest. That, oh no, it's gonna be too hard or too arduous to log onto my systems. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this session of the Cyber Leaders Exchange. So let me thank my guest. Kelvin Brewer is the Director of Public Sector Sales Engineering at Ping Identity. Kelvin, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the Cyber Leaders Exchange.